I still remember the letter. It was folded neatly, slid halfway into my mailbox like it didn't want to be there. Thick paper, bold black ink, with a logo stamped at the top like some kind of royal decree. Notice of violation. Immediate action required. At first I thought it was junk mail. But then I saw my name, printed right under the threat. Remove unauthorized watercraft within 7 days or face fines of up to $100 per day. My heart dropped. My boat? I blinked, rereading the line 3 times. I thought I misunderstood something. I stood in the driveway with that letter in my hand, the early evening sun warm on my back, wondering what the hell was going on. I hadn't moved the boat in weeks. It was sitting peacefully at the dock like it always did. That boat wasn't some rusty eyesore. I bought it 5 years ago, saved up for months. It was nothing fancy, just a small fishing boat with a motor and some good memories. Early mornings, quiet afternoons, the occasional lazy sunset drifting across the lake. It was my escape. And now they wanted it gone? I stepped inside, dropped my keys on the kitchen counter, and read the letter again. This time I noticed the header, HOA Compliance Committee. Great. The same people who once fined my neighbor for having a slightly off-white mailbox now decided my boat was a crime. The wording was aggressive. Like I was some stranger disturbing the peace. Your vessel has been deemed in violation of Section 14B of the Community Bylaws. I didn't even know there was a Section 14B. Who reads those massive HOA rulebooks anyway? I sat down, still holding the paper, and felt this strange mix of confusion and anger rising in my chest. I've lived here for 6 years. Never caused a problem. I show up to community events, smile at the neighbors, even helped the treasurer lift tables once during a storm warning. And suddenly, I'm being told I'm breaking rules I didn't even know existed? The next day I called the number on the letter. Got voicemail. Left a message. Polite but firm. Asked for clarification. No response. I emailed them. Nothing. On day 3 I finally got a call back. A woman from the compliance team told me in the most robotic tone possible that my boat was not allowed to be moored on common property, and that unless I removed it I would be fined. I told her it wasn't on common property. It was on the dock behind my house. My house backs up to the lake and the dock has always been there. The boat was tied to it just like it had been for years. She didn't care. She said the lake was considered shared community space, and that the HOA had full authority to enforce rules regarding its use. I hung up shaking. Not with fear, with frustration. Who gave them that kind of power? And where were they hiding when I first moved in and asked if I could keep a boat? The strangest part? Nobody ever had a problem before. My boat had become part of the scenery. Kids would wave when I cruised by. One neighbor even asked to borrow it once. So why now? I couldn't let it go. Something about the way they handled it felt off. Like they didn't expect anyone to question them. Like they'd gotten so used to people saying, "Yes, sir," that they forgot some of us can read. So I pulled out the dusty old folder with my house documents. Sat on the floor and spread everything out. Deed, surveys, closing papers. Dozens of pages I hadn't touched since the day I signed them. And then something caught my eye. A line buried deep in the deed, under a section labeled Property Description. It said, "Parcel includes exclusive access and rights to adjacent water body as defined in Survey Section C." My stomach did a little flip. Adjacent water body? I ran to the kitchen, opened the drawer stuffed with random house stuff, and pulled out the survey map. There it was, in black and white. My property line went beyond the grassy slope behind my house. It extended into the lake. I stared at the dotted line showing ownership and just stared. Wait, was it possible? I sat back, took a breath, and felt my thoughts start to race. That line, that clause, meant something. I didn't know exactly what yet, but it was a thread, and I was going to pull it. I made a call to a real estate attorney a friend once recommended. Told him the situation. Sent him the documents. He asked me to give him a day to review everything. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing my little boat bobbing at the dock. The same boat they were now treating like an illegal squat. I replayed every memory I had of being out there on the water. Alone. At peace. Like the lake knew how to hold secrets. By morning I had a voicemail from the lawyer. "Hey, you're going to want to talk. This is more interesting than I expected." I called him immediately. He sounded almost excited. He said, "I don't know if you realize what you own, but the paperwork is pretty clear. Based on this deed and the way the lake was originally parceled, it looks like you actually have title rights to the entire lake bed. The lake itself." I didn't say anything. He continued, "Not just access. Not just shoreline. You own the lake." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt so unreal. I wasn't rich. I wasn't powerful. I was just a regular guy who bought a cozy home near some water. And now, somehow, I owned all of it? My lawyer said it wasn't common, but it happens. Especially in older communities, where private lakes were carved out and sold with larger parcels back when nobody expected neighborhoods to grow around them. I was stunned. And then I was angry. Because the HOA, the same people now threatening me with fines, had no right to do so. They didn't own the lake. They didn't even manage it. I had, for years, allowed free use of it without knowing I had any real control. But now I knew. And everything had changed. I walked down to the dock that evening, stood at the edge and looked out over the calm water. The boat rocked gently in place, creaking slightly against the rope. The sky was orange and soft, fading into blue. It didn't look any different. But it felt different. The place I thought I shared was mine. And the people who acted like they held the rules? They were about to get a surprise. The next morning, I woke up early. I didn't even need coffee. My mind was buzzing. I kept playing the lawyer's words in my head. You own the lake. It felt too big. Too crazy. But the documents were real. My deed was crystal clear. The survey showed the lines. And the title history backed it up. Somehow, in the middle of a modern suburban neighborhood, I owned the entire lake that sat right behind my house. For a moment, I felt like I was in one of those movies where the quiet guy finds out he inherited a castle or a secret fortune. Only instead of gold and chandeliers, I had water and ducks. But I wasn't thinking about riches. I was thinking about the letter. That smug, typed-out threat from the HOA telling me to move my boat off community property. The property that was now legally mine. Something shifted inside me. A mixture of pride and irritation. They tried to intimidate me. Tried to scare me with fake authority. And they had no idea I was the one holding the real power. I called the lawyer again. I needed to be sure. I asked him, "Are you telling me that technically I could ask people to leave the lake?" He said, "Yes. With the way this deed is written, the lake is a private body of water. It belongs to you. Anyone using it without your permission could be considered trespassing." It didn't feel real. But I knew it was. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Because I realized just how long I'd been letting them push people around. Not just me, everyone. The HOA had always acted like they were kings of the neighborhood. Enforcing rules, handing out fines, deciding who could paint their mailbox what color. People were afraid of them. They talked in whispers at meetings. Nobody ever pushed back. Until now. And they picked the wrong boat. I decided to dig deeper. I wanted to see just how far the rabbit hole went. I looked up the HOA's bylaws, the same ones they claimed gave them authority over the lake. Buried in all the legal-sounding fluff, I found the truth. They didn't own the lake. Not a single inch of it. There was no easement, no joint management clause, nothing. The entire body of water had been privately deeded back when the land was first developed. They just assumed it was common space because nobody had ever said otherwise. I started to wonder how many times they'd enforced rules they had no right to enforce. How many other homeowners had given in simply because the HOA said so? How many people paid fines just to avoid the stress? It made me sick. So I started taking notes. I wrote down every interaction I'd ever had with them. Every letter. Every voicemail. Every silent glare at a meeting when I asked questions they didn't like. And then I called a second lawyer, just to get a second opinion. He reviewed everything. His response? They've been bluffing. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw something. All this time, all the stress, the worry, the neighbors whispering about the troublemaker with the boat, and they were bluffing. I thought back to the first time I put that boat in the water. It was a quiet Sunday. No wind. Just birds and the ripple of the motor. I had no idea back then that I was launching into something I owned. I just wanted peace. Now I wanted justice. The next few days were a blur. I drafted a letter. Not angry. Not rude. Just facts. I told them I had reviewed the original property deeds and title documents, and discovered that the lake was not community property, but privately owned by me. I told them their violation notice was invalid, and they had no authority to issue directives regarding the use of the lake or the dock. I told them any future communication on the matter should go through my attorney. Then I added one final line. I trust this clears up any confusion. I printed it out, signed it, and mailed a copy directly to the HOA board. And then I waited. The first day nothing happened. No email. No call. Just silence. The second day I got a phone call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. Let it go to voicemail. It was the HOA president. He didn't sound confident this time. His voice was flat. Almost careful. He said, "We received your letter and would like to set up a time to talk. Perhaps we can find a resolution." I didn't respond. Because I didn't need a resolution. I already had the answer. That same day, a neighbor stopped me while I was checking my mail. She asked if I was really the one who owned the lake. I hesitated. Then I said, "That's what the papers say." Her eyes lit up. She told me how her son had been warned by the HOA for skipping stones near the water's edge. Another time, they told her she couldn't set up a small picnic table near the shoreline. She thought they had the power. She never questioned it. Now she knew better. The story spread faster than I expected. A few more neighbors approached me over the next couple of days. Some were curious. Some were angry, but not at me. At the HOA. Apparently, my case wasn't unique. They'd issued warnings for paddle boards, for small kayaks, even for a kid's inflatable swan once. People had been walking on eggshells, thinking they were one wrong move away from a fine. But the truth was out now. And the board? They didn't like that one bit. I got another letter a week later. This one was very different from the first. No threats. No fines. Just a carefully worded note saying they were reviewing the situation and would refrain from further enforcement actions regarding the boat while things were being evaluated. It was the kind of letter that screamed panic without saying it out loud. And I couldn't lie, it felt good. Not because I wanted power, but because I was finally standing in a place where the truth was louder than the noise, where facts silenced bullies. I looked out over the lake that evening and it looked different again. Not because anything had changed, but because everything had. The surface of the water rippled gently in the breeze. A few ducks glided past the dock. Somewhere in the distance, a kid laughed. I didn't feel like a villain. I didn't feel like a hero either. I felt like someone who had finally taken back something that was always his. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't nervous about the next letter. Because now, they were the ones who had to worry about what might come next. A few days passed. Everything was quiet, like the calm after a storm. No more emails. No more threats. Just the soft, everyday sounds of the lake. Wind in the trees, birds calling, the occasional splash as a fish broke the surface. It should have felt peaceful. But it didn't. Because I could feel something building. Like the HOA wasn't done. Like they were regrouping, trying to find a new angle. And I was right. The next Saturday, I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't a delivery. It was the HOA president himself, Rick. Now, Rick had always acted like he ran the neighborhood. You know the type. Walks around with a clipboard, measuring lawn heights, checking fences for unauthorized paint colors. Always smiling, but in that way where it doesn't quite reach his eyes. He stood there in his golf polo and khaki shorts, pretending to be casual. "I thought maybe we could talk," he said, glancing behind me like he expected to see a lawyer standing in the hallway. I let him in. "Why not? Let's talk." He walked in like he owned the place, like this wasn't the first time he'd done this with someone. Sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out a folder. I didn't say a word. He opened the folder like it was some big dramatic moment, then slid a printed sheet across the table toward me. It was a revised version of the HOA Lake Guidelines. Newly drafted. Just days old. At the top it read, "Proposed Rules for Shared Water Use." I stared at it. He cleared his throat. "We thought maybe we could revisit some of the expectations regarding the lake, for everyone's benefit." I didn't touch the paper. I asked him, "Who's we?" He looked a little uncomfortable, then said, "The board." I said, "The same board that just learned they don't own the lake?" His mouth opened like he was about to argue, but then he stopped. He wasn't used to being challenged. That much was clear. He shifted in his chair. "We just think it would help the community if there were clear guidelines in place. You know, to avoid confusion." I couldn't help but laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculous. I told him, "Rick, the only confusion here was your assumption that you had authority over something that was never yours." He tried to pivot. Said it wasn't about control, it was about safety. He mentioned boats, swimmers, liability, the usual checklist of scare tactics. But I saw through it. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about rules. It was about power. They hated that they lost it. And now they were trying to find a way to grab some of it back, quietly, politely, on their terms. He asked me to consider cooperating for the greater good. I asked him if the greater good included threatening fines, lying about ownership, and ignoring property deeds. He didn't answer that. Instead, he folded up his little paper and said, "We'll be in touch." I nodded and he walked out. I watched him go down the driveway, back stiff, shoulders tight. He didn't look back. The moment the door closed, I sat down and just breathed. It was strange. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was tired. Exhausted by the game they were playing. The way they wrapped pressure in politeness, hoping I'd cave. But I didn't. Because now I had something stronger than their threats. I had truth. Word spread fast after that visit. The board had apparently told a few other residents about the new lake rules, hoping to build support. But this time people weren't buying it. Because by now most of them had heard the full story. About the deed. About the lawyer. About the fact that the lake was mine. Some people came up to me curious. One guy who lived across the lake told me he'd always felt uncomfortable when the HOA reps came by his yard, asking about dock permits. Turns out he thought the lake was public too. Now he was just relieved to know the truth. But others? Some were furious. Not at me but at the HOA. Especially the ones who'd paid fines over the years. For paddle boards. For dock repairs. For little things that suddenly looked like pure nonsense. I didn't even need to say anything anymore. The neighborhood started speaking for itself. A few residents started showing up to board meetings. Real people, not just the same 3 volunteers and Rick's friends. They asked real questions. Demanded answers. Where did the fine money go? Why did the board pretend to control things it didn't? Why had nobody checked the legal documents? And the best part? The board had no good answers. You could see it in their faces, sweaty, confused, trying to hold their usual poker faces while the room turned against them. I stayed quiet. Didn't even attend the meetings. I didn't need to. Because now they were the ones under the microscope. And then came the final straw. I got a formal letter, again. But this time it wasn't a threat. It was an apology. A carefully worded, corporate-sounding apology, signed by the HOA president and 2 board members. It said they regretted the earlier misunderstanding, and that they would respect all individual property rights as defined by official land records. It even acknowledged that no further enforcement actions will be taken regarding the lake or associated structures. I read it twice. Then I poured myself a drink and took it out to the dock. I sat there for a long time. Watched the sun go down. The water shimmered gold, the trees swayed gently, and the boat rocked quietly beside me. It had been a journey. More than I ever expected. I hadn't asked for any of this. I didn't wake up one day wanting to fight the HOA. I just wanted to be left alone. I wanted to enjoy the lake, take my boat out, fish once in a while, maybe catch a sunset or 2. But the thing about peace is, sometimes you have to fight for it. Not with fists. Not with yelling. But with facts. With patience. With knowing when to stand still and let the other side trip over their own lies. Now the lake was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. It was mine. And this time everyone knew it.